The army surrounded the hippodrome, where tens of thousands of rioters had gathered. Trapped inside, they were slaughtered. Some accounts say as many as 30,000 people were killed in a single day. The Nika riots ended in blood and ash, but Justinian's throne was secure. From the ruins, he began to rebuild his city. Hagia Sophia, a church of light. In the aftermath of the riots, Justinian ordered the construction of a new church, one that would surpass all others in magnificence. This was the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Built in just 5 years, Hagia Sophia was a marvel of engineering. Its massive dome seemed to float on air, supported by hidden arches and filled with light that streamed through dozens of windows. Inside, shimmering mosaics of gold and glass reflected the glow of candles, creating a vision of heaven on earth. When the church was completed, Justinian is said to have entered and exclaimed, "Solomon, I have outdone you," comparing his achievement to the great Temple of Jerusalem. For nearly 1,000 years, Hagia Sophia stood as the largest church in Christendom, a symbol of Byzantine power and divine favor. The Code of Justinian, order from chaos. Justinian's ambitions were not limited to buildings and monuments. He sought to reform the very foundation of Roman law. Over centuries, Roman law had grown vast and unwieldy, filled with conflicting decrees and outdated statutes. Justinian ordered his jurists to gather, clarify, and codify the laws of the empire. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law, also known as the Code of Justinian. This monumental work preserved the wisdom of Roman law and shaped the development of legal systems for centuries to come. In many ways, it is Justinian's most enduring legacy, a foundation for modern law across Europe and beyond. The dream of reconquest. But Justinian's greatest dream lay beyond Constantinople's walls. He longed to restore the empire's lost western provinces, to bring back North Africa, Italy, and even Rome itself under imperial control. For this task, he relied on his greatest general, Belisarius. Belisarius and the Wars of Reconquest. Belisarius was young, brilliant, and loyal. In 533 CE, he led a fleet across the Mediterranean to North Africa, where the Vandals had established a kingdom. In a lightning campaign, Belisarius defeated the Vandals and restored Africa to the empire. The victories were so swift and complete that the Vandal kingdom vanished almost overnight. Next came Italy. In 535 CE, Belisarius invaded the peninsula. The reconquest was not easy. The Goths resisted fiercely, and the war dragged on for nearly 2 decades, devastating Italy. Cities were besieged, countryside ravaged, populations reduced. But in the end, Justinian's armies prevailed. By the mid-6th century, much of the Western Empire, North Africa, Italy, parts of Spain was once again under Roman control. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed Justinian had fulfilled his dream. Challenges and strains. Yet glory came at a cost. The reconquest strained the empire's resources. Constantinople's treasury, already depleted by building projects and wars, ran thin. The army was stretched across vast territories, vulnerable to new threats. And nature itself struck a cruel blow. In 541 CE, a plague swept through the empire, the plague of Justinian. Carried by fleas on rats, the disease ravaged Constantinople, killing tens of thousands, including perhaps Justinian himself, who fell ill but survived. The plague weakened the empire just as it needed strength. Tax revenues fell, armies thinned, and morale suffered. Despite victories abroad, the Byzantine Empire found itself exhausted. The legacy of Justinian. When Justinian died in 565 CE, he left behind an empire both greater and more fragile than before. He had restored lands once thought lost forever. He had built monuments that stood as wonders of the world. He had given the empire a unified code of law. And yet, his conquests proved difficult to hold. Within decades, much of Italy would fall again to new invaders, the Lombards. North Africa, too, would face unrest. Still, Justinian's reign marked a pinnacle of Byzantine history. For centuries after, his name was remembered as the emperor who dared to dream of a restored Rome. Close your eyes now and picture Constantinople at dusk during Justinian's reign. The domes of the city glow in the setting sun. The Hagia Sophia rises, its golden mosaics catching the last light of day. The hippodrome echoes with the cheers of chariot races. Markets bustle with traders from every corner of the world: Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, Syrians, Goths. And in the great palace, Justinian and Theodora sit side by side, dreaming of an empire reborn. For a time, it seemed that Rome had indeed risen again, not in Italy, but here, on the shores of the Bosporus. The Western Empire was gone, but in Byzantium, the Roman spirit burned brightly. The challenges of Byzantium, from Heraclius to the Arab conquests. The story of Byzantium, like the slow turning of the tides, was one of resilience and reinvention. From the golden vision of Constantine and the daring ambitions of Justinian, as you breathe slowly and evenly, allow yourself to drift back once more to Constantinople, the beating heart of this empire. Imagine the city in the early dawn light, its domes glimmering with dew, its high walls standing watch over the shimmering waters of the Bosporus. Fishermen cast their nets into the straits, merchants carry goods through arched gates, and priests light lamps in the great basilicas, their flames dancing in the still air. Yet even as life in the capital bustled with routine, storm clouds were gathering beyond the horizon. The Byzantine world stood on the edge of profound transformation. Heraclius and the Persian Wars. To meet this new chapter of history, we must first come to know one of Byzantium's most remarkable rulers, Heraclius. Heraclius rose to power in the early 7th century, a time when the empire seemed to be collapsing under its own weight. The treasury was drained, the army weakened, and enemies pressed in from every direction. Most urgently, the empire was locked in a desperate war with its ancient rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire. For decades, Byzantium and Persia had traded victories and defeats, like two exhausted wrestlers struggling for dominance. But by the time Heraclius became emperor, Persia held the advantage. Their armies had swept deep into Byzantine lands, capturing Syria, Palestine, and even reaching the gates of Egypt. Jerusalem had fallen to Persian forces, and with it, the precious relic of the true cross, a symbol of faith and hope for Christians across the empire. Imagine the despair that hung over the people of Constantinople at this time. Whispers filled the marketplaces: would the empire survive? Was this the end of the new Rome? Even the clergy spoke of prophecy and punishment, as if divine judgment had turned against Byzantium. But Heraclius refused to surrender. He reorganized the empire, cutting unnecessary spending, raising new armies, and even melting down church treasures to fund the defense. It was a bold, even controversial act, but one that gave the empire a chance to breathe again. With renewed strength, Heraclius launched a daring counteroffensive. Unlike earlier emperors who fought in short campaigns, Heraclius personally led his armies across Anatolia, through Armenia, and deep into Persian territory. For years he remained on campaign, sleeping in tents, marching with soldiers, and inspiring them with his courage. The turning point came in 627 CE, at the Battle of Nineveh. There, Heraclius's forces clashed with the Persians in a brutal and decisive struggle. The Byzantines emerged victorious, and soon after, the Persian king was overthrown by his own people. Peace was restored, and the captured territories, including the sacred relic of the true cross, were returned. For a brief moment, Byzantium seemed to stand tall again. Heraclius entered Jerusalem in triumph, carrying the true cross back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The people hailed him as a savior, a second Constantine, a restorer of the Christian world. And yet, just as the empire caught its breath, an even greater storm approached. The Arab conquests. In the deserts of Arabia, far from the palaces of Constantinople, a new force was rising. The teachings of the Prophet Muhammad had united the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula with a shared faith, purpose, and determination. Following his death in 632 CE, the followers of Islam expanded rapidly, carrying their new religion beyond Arabia and into the surrounding empires. At first, the Byzantines may have thought little of these desert warriors. But soon, reports reached Constantinople of armies sweeping across the Near East with astonishing speed. Within just a few years, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, lands that Heraclius had fought so hard to recover, fell to the Arabs. Imagine the shock of the Byzantines, watching as one by one, their richest provinces slipped away. Egypt, with its fertile Nile and vast grain supplies, had long been the breadbasket of the empire. Syria and Palestine were not only valuable economically but also spiritually, home to many holy sites. Now, they were lost. The loss was not just territorial. It was psychological. For centuries, Byzantium had seen itself as the center of the Christian world, the guardian of faith against pagan and heretic alike. But now, a new faith had risen, one that spread with unstoppable momentum. Heraclius, once celebrated as the savior of the empire, spent his final years in sorrow. He had fought so bravely, yet much of what he regained slipped away before his eyes. When he died in 641 CE, the empire was smaller, poorer, and more fragile than it had been in centuries. Adapting to survival. And yet, Byzantium endured. This was the remarkable quality of the empire, not its size, nor its wealth, but its ability to adapt. The empire reorganized itself in response to these losses. With less land to draw from, it needed a more efficient way to govern and defend what remained. This led to the creation of the theme system, a new military administrative structure that divided the empire into regions, each led by a military commander responsible for local defense. Farmers were granted land in exchange for military service, ensuring that armies could be raised quickly without draining the treasury. This system, born out of necessity, would sustain Byzantium for centuries to come. It reflected the empire's gift for resilience, transforming crisis into opportunity, and decline into reinvention. Constantinople under siege. The Arab conquests did not stop with the provinces. Twice, in 674 CE and again in 717 CE, the Arab armies and fleets advanced all the way to Constantinople itself. Picture the great city bracing for siege. The harbors were filled with Byzantine warships, ready to defend the Bosporus. Inside, the people prayed, fearing that the empire's capital might finally fall. But the Byzantines had a secret weapon, Greek fire. This mysterious substance, projected from bronze tubes, burst into flames upon contact with water, clinging to ships and burning with terrifying intensity. With this weapon, the Byzantines turned back the Arab fleets, saving the city and ensuring the empire's survival. For those who lived through the sieges, the memory of fiery seas and burning ships must have felt like something from legend. In their eyes, Constantinople had been protected not only by walls and fire, but by divine providence itself. A smaller, stronger empire. By the end of the 7th century, Byzantium was no longer the vast empire of Justinian's dreams. It had lost its wealthiest provinces, its population had shrunk, and its influence had diminished. But what remained was more compact, more manageable, and fiercely defended. Constantinople remained the heart of the empire, its churches filled with golden light, its markets bustling, its scholars preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to time. The Byzantines carried forward their Roman heritage, their Christian faith, and their Greek traditions, weaving them into a unique civilization that would continue to shine even in times of darkness. And so, though battered by the Persian wars and the Arab conquests, the empire endured. It stood as a reminder that survival is not always about strength or size, but about adaptability, resilience, and the quiet determination to endure against the odds. As you let these images drift through your mind, the triumphs of Heraclius, the sorrow of his final years, the fiery defense of Constantinople, allow your breath to remain steady and calm. The story of Byzantium in the 7th century was not one of easy victories. It was a story of struggle, loss, and survival. And yet, from those struggles, the empire emerged transformed, ready to face the centuries ahead. The waves of history rise and fall, just as your breath rises and falls now. And like Byzantium, you too can find strength in stillness, resilience in rest, and renewal in the quiet passage of time. Iconoclasm and the struggle for the soul of Byzantium. History is not only shaped by battles and kings, by cities defended and lands lost. Sometimes, its deepest turning points are born within the soul moments of faith, belief, and conviction that ripple outward to transform entire civilizations. The Byzantine Empire, having weathered the storms of Persian invasions and Arab conquests, now turned inward. The 8th and 9th centuries would not be remembered only for wars at the borders, but for a great conflict within. A struggle not of armies, but of ideas. It was called iconoclasm, literally, the breaking of images. And for more than a century, it would divide families, communities, and even emperors and patriarchs, as Byzantium wrestled with the question. Should holy icons, painted images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints be venerated, or destroyed? Tonight, let us drift softly into this chapter of history, where faith, art, and politics intertwined like threads of a vast tapestry. The world after Heraclius. After the reign of Heraclius, Byzantium had changed profoundly. The empire was smaller, and its people had learned to adapt to constant pressure from the rising power of Islam. Arab raids swept across Anatolia year after year, forcing farmers and soldiers alike to remain ever vigilant. Meanwhile, the empire's hold on Italy weakened, as Lombards advanced and Rome increasingly turned its gaze toward the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, for leadership. Yet, despite these pressures, Constantinople still shone as a jewel of the Mediterranean. The great city had withstood sieges, protected by its triple walls and secret weapon of Greek fire. Its churches glimmered with mosaics, their golden tiles catching the light of countless candles. Within them, worshippers gazed upon painted icons, tender images of Christ blessing the faithful, or the Virgin Mary cradling the infant Jesus. For the Byzantine people, icons were not mere decorations. They were windows to the divine, reminders that heaven was near, that the saints interceded, and that the holy was present in daily life. To kiss an icon, to burn incense before it, to carry it into battle, these were acts of devotion that brought comfort and strength. But not everyone agreed. And soon, this devotion would become the spark of bitter conflict. The birth of iconoclasm. In the early 700s, voices began to rise against the veneration of icons. Some argued that Christians were straying too close to idolatry, worshipping images rather than God. Others believed that the disasters befalling the empire, the loss of provinces, the relentless Arab raids were signs of divine anger. Perhaps, they thought, God punished Byzantium because its people had turned icons into idols. Into this atmosphere stepped Emperor Leo III, who ruled from 717 to 741 CE. Leo had risen to power as a soldier, defending Constantinople during the Great Arab Siege of 717 to 718. He was practical, decisive, and deeply concerned with securing the empire's survival. Around 726 CE, Leo issued his first orders against the veneration of icons. He commanded that an icon of Christ, which stood above the great Cholke gate of the imperial palace, be removed. When soldiers climbed to take it down, angry crowds protested, and blood was spilled in the streets of Constantinople. This was the beginning of the first wave of iconoclasm. Leo pressed. The empire found itself split not by borders, but by belief. The first iconoclast period, 726 to 787. For more than 60 years, Byzantium wrestled with this internal struggle. Under Leo III and his son, Constantine V, icons were denounced and their defenders persecuted. Constantine V, in particular, was a passionate and forceful iconoclast. He convened councils to declare icons heretical, and his policies led to the removal of countless works of sacred art. Mosaics were torn from church walls, wooden panels burned, and frescoes whitewashed. But this was not only about theology. Iconoclasm had political dimensions as well. Some historians believe that emperors sought to assert their authority over the church, challenging the power of monks and clerics who defended icons. Others note that the Islamic world, with its ban on religious imagery, may have influenced Byzantine rulers. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued to cling to their beloved icons. In quiet chapels, behind closed doors, many still kissed painted panels and prayed before the faces of saints. For them, these images were not idols but companions of faith. And so, even as the empire's rulers sought to erase them, icons lived on in the hearts of the faithful. The triumph of icons under Empress Irene. The first wave of iconoclasm came to an end not with an emperor, but with an empress. After Constantine V's death, the throne eventually passed to his son, but it was Empress Irene, acting as regent for her young son Constantine VI, who took power in 780 CE. Irene was a strong-willed and deeply pious woman. She believed in the veneration of icons and sought to restore them to their rightful place in Byzantine worship. In 787 CE, she convened the Second Council of Nicaea, one of the great ecumenical councils of the Christian Church. There, bishops declared that icons were not idols, but aids to devotion, deserving of honor and respect. The veneration of icons was restored, and for a time, peace seemed to return. Imagine the joy of the faithful, once again able to gaze upon the serene face of Christ or the gentle eyes of the Virgin Mary in their churches. The golden mosaics of Hagia Sophia shone brighter than ever, reflecting not only light but the renewed spirit of devotion. The Second Iconoclast period, 814 to 843. But the struggle was not yet finished. In the early 9th century, a second wave of iconoclasm began. Emperors once again ordered the destruction of icons, driven by both religious conviction and political calculation. For nearly 30 more years, Byzantium remained divided. The conflict pitted emperor against patriarch, soldier against monk, brother against brother. Icons were smashed, hidden, or smuggled into secret places of worship. Yet once again, it was not an emperor, but another woman who brought the conflict to its end. The triumph of orthodoxy. In 843 CE, the regent Empress Theodora, ruling on behalf of her young son Michael III, restored the veneration of icons permanently. She ordered that icons be returned to the churches, and that the faithful once more be free to honor them. This event was celebrated with a great procession in Constantinople, carrying icons through the streets in triumph. The day became known as the Triumph of Orthodoxy, and it is still commemorated in the Eastern Orthodox Church each year, on the first Sunday of Lent. With this, the era of iconoclasm finally ended. Icons, once smashed and banned, now became more central than ever to Byzantine spirituality. Artists returned to their craft, painting tender and luminous faces of Christ and the saints, filling churches with images that inspired generations to come. The legacy of the struggle. Looking back, iconoclasm may seem like a strange conflict. Why fight so fiercely over images? But to the Byzantines, this was no small matter. Icons represented the heart of their faith, their way of seeing God's presence in the world. The struggle also revealed much about the empire itself. It showed the deep entanglement of religion and politics, the power of emperors to shape worship, and the resilience of the church and faithful to endure. And in the end, Byzantium emerged with a renewed sense of identity, one that would shape Orthodox Christianity for centuries. The glittering icons of Byzantine art, with their golden backgrounds and serene expressions, remain among the empire's most enduring legacies. As you let these images drift in your mind, picture the golden glow of candlelight dancing across the face of an icon. Imagine the hush of a Byzantine chapel, where prayers whispered in Greek rise like incense to the vaulted ceiling. Through centuries of struggle, faith endures like a flame that flickers, but never dies. The story of iconoclasm reminds us that history is not only about power and empire, but about belief, about the ways humans seek the divine, and about the quiet strength of devotion. As your breath slows and your body sinks into rest, let the resilience of Byzantium guide you toward peace. For just as the empire found renewal after turmoil, so too can you find calm after the day's trials. The Macedonian Renaissance and Byzantium's Golden Age. History often moves like the tides, rising, receding, then rising again. After centuries of turmoil, wars, iconoclastic strife, and the endless struggle for survival, Byzantium entered a new dawn. It was a time of revival, of confidence, of flourishing culture and renewed power. This era, known as the Macedonian Renaissance, stretched from the late 9th century into the 11th. Under a dynasty of emperors who bore the name Macedonian, the Byzantine Empire regained stability, expanded its influence, and experienced a flowering of learning and art. Some called it Byzantium's Golden Age. And tonight, as we drift through this chapter, we will explore the emperors, the scholars, the soldiers, and the dreamers who made it shine. The rise of the Macedonian dynasty. The story begins with a man of humble origin, Basil I, who ruled from 867 to 886 CE. Basil was not born into nobility. He was said to be of peasant stock from the region of Macedonia, and his rise was marked by ambition, cunning, and opportunity. Through service at court, he gained the favor of Emperor Michael III. Basil's skill with horses and his keen political instincts made him stand out. Eventually, he was elevated to co-emperor before seizing power outright after Michael's death. With Basil I, the Macedonian dynasty began. His rule laid the foundations for more than 2 centuries of relative stability, in which Byzantium would thrive. Basil I, the founder. Basil I strengthened imperial authority and reformed the legal code. He sought to restore order after decades of upheaval, and he worked to repair relations with the church following the long scars of iconoclasm. Under his patronage, art and scholarship flourished. The imperial court became a center of intellectual life, preserving and copying ancient texts. Scribes worked tirelessly to safeguard the wisdom of Greece and Rome, ensuring that works of philosophy, history, and science would endure. Though Basil's path to the throne was marked with intrigue, his legacy was one of renewal. When he died in 886, he left an empire more secure and prosperous than it had been in generations. Leo VI, the Wise. Basil's son, Leo VI, succeeded him and reigned from 886 to 912 CE. Leo was called the Wise, not because he was a great general, but because of his love of learning. He expanded his father's legal reforms, producing the Basilica, a massive codification of Byzantine law that would guide the empire for centuries. He also wrote treatises on military tactics, theology, and even court ceremony, leaving behind a rich record of his intellectual pursuits. But Leo's reign was not without challenges. He faced threats from Bulgarians in the Balkans and Arabs at sea. Yet, despite military struggles, the empire's cultural life continued to blossom. Scholars, poets, and artists thrived under his patronage, weaving together a vision of Byzantium as heir to both Greek wisdom and Christian devotion. Constantine VII, the Scholar Emperor. Perhaps the most emblematic figure of the Macedonian Renaissance was Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus, who ruled from 913 to 959 CE. Born in the purple within the sacred chambers of the imperial palace, Constantine was destined for the throne, but his path was complicated. For much of his early life, he was overshadowed by powerful regents and co-emperors. Only later did he rule in his own right. Some called it Byzantium's Golden Age. And tonight, as we drift through this chapter, we will explore the emperors, the scholars, the soldiers, and the dreamers who made it shine. The rise of the Macedonian dynasty. The story begins with a man of humble origin, Basil I, who ruled from 867 to 886 CE. Basil was not born into nobility. He was said to be of peasant stock from the region of Macedonia, and his rise was marked by ambition, cunning, and opportunity. Through service at court, he gained the favor of Emperor Michael III. Basil's skill with horses and his keen political instincts made him stand out. Eventually, he was elevated to co-emperor before seizing power outright after Michael's death. With Basil I, the Macedonian dynasty began. His rule laid the foundations for more than 2 centuries of relative stability, in which Byzantium would thrive. Basil I, the founder. Basil I strengthened imperial authority and reformed the legal code. He sought to restore order after decades of upheaval, and he worked to repair relations with the church following the long scars of iconoclasm. Under his patronage, art and scholarship flourished. The imperial court became a center of intellectual life, preserving and copying ancient texts. Scribes worked tirelessly to safeguard the wisdom of Greece and Rome, ensuring that works of philosophy, history, and science would endure. Though Basil's path to the throne was marked with intrigue, his legacy was one of renewal. When he died in 886, he left an empire more secure and prosperous than it had been in generations. Leo VI, the Wise. Basil's son, Leo VI, succeeded him and reigned from 886 to 912 CE. Leo was called the Wise, not because he was a great general, but because of his love of learning. He expanded his father's legal reforms, producing the Basilica, a massive codification of Byzantine law that would guide the empire for centuries. He also wrote treatises on military tactics, theology, and even court ceremony, leaving behind a rich record of his intellectual pursuits. But Leo's reign was not without challenges. He faced threats from Bulgarians in the Balkans and Arabs at sea. Yet, despite military struggles, the empire's cultural life continued to blossom. Scholars, poets, and artists thrived under his patronage, weaving together a vision of Byzantium as heir to both Greek wisdom and Christian devotion. Constantine VII, the Scholar Emperor. Perhaps the most emblematic figure of the Macedonian Renaissance was Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus, who ruled from 913 to 959 CE. Born in the purple within the sacred chambers of the imperial palace, Constantine was destined for the throne, but his path was complicated. For much of his early life, he was overshadowed by powerful regents and co-emperors. Only later did he rule in his own right. But though politics delayed his power, he surrounded himself with intellectuals and devoted himself to writing. His works included guides for governing the empire, descriptions of court ceremonies, and even ethnographic accounts of neighboring peoples. Through his pen, we glimpse the Byzantine world as he saw it, a vast empire at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, deeply conscious of its heritage and its mission. The Macedonian military revival. While learning flourished in Constantinople, the empire's armies also regained strength. For centuries, Byzantium had been on the defensive, fighting to hold its ground against Arab raids and Slavic incursions. But under the Macedonian emperors, the tide began to turn. In the 10th century, generals such as Nikephoros Phokas and John Simoskis led campaigns that pushed the empire's frontiers outward. Cities in Anatolia were secured, Crete was reconquered, and Byzantine armies advanced deep into Syria. The empire's navy, too, dominated the seas once more, wielding the fearsome power of Greek fire. These victories not only secured borders but also filled the empire's coffers with tribute and plunder. Prosperity spread, and Constantinople flourished as a city of wealth and wonder. The splendor of Constantinople. Imagine walking through the streets of Constantinople during this golden age. The markets overflow with goods from across the world, silk from China, spices from India, furs from the north, and grain from Egypt. Merchants shout their wares in a dozen languages, while pilgrims flock to the city's great churches, their eyes lifted to golden mosaics. The Hagia Sophia, with its vast dome glittering like heaven itself, remains the heart of Byzantine faith. Nearby, the imperial palace complex bustles with courtiers, scholars, and envoys from distant lands. Ceremonies unfold with precise choreography, processions, robes of purple and gold, chants echoing through vast halls. This was not just a city. It was a stage upon which Byzantium displayed its glory to the world. The Macedonian Renaissance in learning and art. The term Renaissance here does not mean a rediscovery of learning, as in Western Europe centuries later, but rather a revival and renewal. Byzantine scholars, under imperial patronage, copied and preserved the works of ancient Greece, Homer, Plato, Aristotle, and more. Without their labor, much of classical knowledge might have been lost to time. Art, too, thrived. Icons returned in full splendor after the end of iconoclasm, painted with luminous faces and golden halos that seemed to glow in candlelight. Mosaics adorned church walls, shimmering with heavenly beauty. Manuscripts were illuminated with intricate designs, blending classical motifs with Christian themes. The Macedonian period also refined Byzantine court culture. Ceremonial life grew more elaborate, with rituals that reinforced the majesty of the emperor as God's chosen ruler on earth. For though empires rise and fall, the beauty they create endures, shining across time, whispering to us in the quiet of history. Rest, then, in the glow of Byzantium's golden age. The story continues, for ahead lie both triumphs and trials, as new challenges await the empire that dreamed of eternity. The Great Schism of 1054 and the fracturing of Christendom. History often unfolds not just in battles or political intrigue, but in words, rituals, and the quiet yet powerful realm of belief. For centuries, Christianity had been the unifying faith of Byzantium and the West, stretching from Rome to Constantinople, from the shores of the Atlantic to the mountains of Armenia. Yet beneath that unity, differences simmered, differences in culture, language, theology, and authority. By the middle of the 11th century, those tensions boiled over. The result was the Great Schism of 1054, a rupture between the Eastern Orthodox Church, centered in Constantinople, and the Roman Catholic Church, centered in Rome. It was not a single moment, nor caused by a single quarrel, but rather the culmination of centuries of divergence. In this chapter, we will drift slowly through the story of that separation, how it arose, why it mattered, and what it meant for Byzantium, for Europe, and for the Christian world. The long divergence of East and West. The roots of the Great Schism stretch back long before 1054. From the earliest centuries of Christianity, there had been 5 great patriarchates: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Together they were meant to share authority, bound by a common faith. But in practice, Rome and Constantinople increasingly stood apart. Language was one divide. The Latin West and the Greek East spoke different tongues, which shaped their thought and worship. Culture was another. Western Christianity developed within the framework of Germanic kingdoms, while Eastern Christianity was shaped by the Greek-speaking empire of Byzantium. Even theology took different emphases. The West spoke often of law, guilt, and penance. The East dwelt more on mystery, incarnation, and divine union. Both drew from the same roots, but their branches grew in different directions. The question of authority. Perhaps the greatest difference lay in the question of authority. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, claimed primacy over the entire Christian Church, tracing his authority back to St. Peter. For Western Christians, this was a natural foundation of unity. But in the East, the Patriarch of Constantinople saw himself as equal to Rome, not subordinate. The Byzantines believed authority should be shared among the patriarchs, and that no single bishop could claim supremacy. For them, the emperor himself often played the role of final arbiter in church affairs. This tension simmered for centuries, flaring in disputes over doctrine, discipline, and jurisdiction. The Filioque controversy. One theological dispute became emblematic of the growing rift, the Filioque. In the original Nicene Creed, Christians professed belief in the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from the Father. But in the West, beginning in Spain and later adopted in Rome, a phrase was added, and the Son, in Latin, Filioque. Thus, the West proclaimed the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son, while the East held firmly to the original wording. To many Byzantines, this was not a small matter. It was altering the creed of the ecumenical councils, something no single church had authority to do. It became a symbol of the West's arrogance in imposing changes unilaterally. Cultural misunderstandings. Beyond theology, cultural differences deepened the divide. Western priests increasingly practiced clerical celibacy, while in the East parish priests were often married. Western Christians used unleavened bread in the Eucharist, while the East insisted on leavened bread. Even gestures of worship, styles of vestments, and liturgical languages marked subtle but powerful divergences. Each side began to see the other not just as different, but as alien, strange, and perhaps even dangerous. The events of 1054. All these tensions came to a head in the year 1054. Pope Leo IX sent a delegation to Constantinople, led by Cardinal Humbert, to negotiate with Patriarch Michael Cerularius. The talks were fraught from the beginning. Humbert was stern and uncompromising, while Cerularius was proud and unyielding. When agreement proved impossible, Humbert marched into the Great Hagia Sophia on July 16, 1054, during the Divine Liturgy. There, upon the altar, he laid a bull of excommunication, declaring the Patriarch and his followers cut off from the Church of Rome. Cerularius, in turn, excommunicated Humbert and his companions. Though technically the excommunication applied to individuals rather than entire churches, the symbolism was unmistakable. What had been drifting apart for centuries now stood divided. The weight of the schism. At the time, many may not have realized the full significance. There had been schisms before, and often they had healed. But this time was different. The breach of 1054 hardened over time. Theologians on both sides wrote in defense of their positions. Pride, politics, and prejudice deepened the rift. By the time of the Crusades, the division was cemented. Western knights who marched through Byzantine lands viewed their Orthodox brethren with suspicion, even hostility. And when the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204, the wound became nearly irreparable. Byzantium and the Schism. For Byzantium, the schism was both a tragedy and a revelation. Tragedy, because it severed the empire from the West at a time when unity might have preserved Christendom against external foes. Revelation, because it forced Byzantium to define itself more clearly as the guardian of orthodoxy, distinct from Latin. The emperor and the patriarch became twin pillars of this identity, one wielding the sword, the other the cross, together defending a vision of faith and empire intertwined. The legacy of division. The Great Schism was not just about bread or words in a creed. It was about identity, power, and the human tendency to cling to what is familiar while fearing what is different. For the East, orthodoxy became inseparable from the Byzantine world. For the West, Catholicism marched forward as the unifying faith of medieval Europe. Even today, the echoes of 1054 remain. Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches remain separate, though dialogue continues. Schism is remembered as both a wound and a lesson, a reminder of how fragile unity can be, and how costly pride can become. As you breathe slowly and drift deeper into calm, picture the Hagia Sophia in 1054. Candles flicker. Chants echo against marble and mosaic. And in the midst of sacred ritual, two delegations clash not with swords, but with words that carried the weight of centuries. The schism was not sudden, it was the culmination of countless small fractures, long in the making. And yet, in that moment, history crystallized into a divide that shaped 1,000 years to follow. As you rest, let your mind linger on the lesson of that divide, that unity is precious, fragile, and easily lost, while division, once planted, can echo for generations. The story of Byzantium continues, for though fractured, the empire still stood majestic, enduring, and fated to face new trials in the centuries ahead. The Comnenian Restoration and Byzantium's last revival. The Byzantine Empire, scarred by division, weakened by war, and humbled by crises, often seemed poised on the edge of collapse. And yet, time and again, it found within itself the strength to rise, to gather its resources, and to shine once more with brilliance. In the late 11th century, such a revival emerged under the Comnenian dynasty. Led by a succession of remarkable emperors Alexios I, John II, and Manuel I Comnenos, Byzantium regained strength, stability, and a measure of its old prestige. Though the empire could never again reach the vast dominance of Justinian's day, the Comnenian age was a last flowering, a golden autumn before the long winter of decline. It was an age of resilience, of political cunning, of military recovery, and of cultural splendor. Let us walk slowly, gently, through the story of this final revival, where Byzantium glowed once more with power and beauty before shadows returned. The crisis before renewal. To understand the brilliance of the Comnenian restoration, we must first see the darkness that preceded it. In the mid-11th century, Byzantium was shaken by repeated blows. The Seljuk Turks had invaded from the east, defeating the imperial armies at the catastrophic Battle of Manzikert in 1070. Military discipline crumbled, while provincial revolts and aristocratic rivalries drained strength from within. The Normans, bold warriors from the west, attacked Byzantine holdings in southern Italy. The once mighty empire seemed to stagger under the weight of its misfortunes. Its revenues shrank, its armies faltered, and its prestige dwindled. It was in this hour of weakness that the Komnenoi rose to the throne. Alexios I Komnenos, the savior of Byzantium. In 1081, Alexios I Komnenos became emperor. Only 24 years old, he inherited an empire in turmoil, threatened on every side. But Alexios was brilliant, resourceful, and pragmatic. Facing the Normans. His first challenge came from the Normans, led by Robert Guiscard. The Normans invaded the Balkans, seeking to carve their own kingdom out of Byzantine lands. Alexios fought desperately, sometimes defeated, sometimes victorious, but always determined. Through clever diplomacy, he secured allies, convincing the Venetians to support him at sea, granting them lucrative trade privileges in return. It was a costly bargain, but it bought Byzantium's survival. The First Crusade. Then came a moment that would shape the world, the call for the First Crusade. When Alexios appealed to the West for help against the Turks, Pope Urban II responded with a summons not just for soldiers, but for Christendom itself to march east in holy war. The Crusaders who arrived were not what Alexios expected. Instead of disciplined armies, he faced vast waves of knights, lords, and peasants, each with their own ambitions. Alexios, cautious and calculating, guided them toward Anatolia, seeking to reclaim lost lands for Byzantium. And though the crusade brought both cooperation and tension, it gave the empire breathing room, restoring parts of Asia Minor to imperial control. John II Komnenos, the gentle emperor. After Alexios, his son John II Komnenos inherited the throne in 1118. Known as the gentle and good emperor, John was modest, devout, and deeply committed to justice. He reorganized the army, strengthened the treasury, and launched careful campaigns to reclaim territory. Unlike many rulers of his age, John avoided cruelty and excess. Even his enemies admired his fairness and integrity. Under John, Byzantium slowly healed. The eastern frontier was fortified, and victories against the Turks restored confidence. The empire grew quieter, more stable, its wounds knitting under his patient leadership. Manuel I Komnenos, the Magnificent. John's son, Manuel I Komnenos, brought the dynasty to its height. Ascending the throne in 1143, Manuel was bold, ambitious, and charismatic. Where John had been humble, Manuel was dazzling, eager to compete with the kings and emperors of the Latin West. A cosmopolitan emperor. He married Western princesses, forged alliances, and sought to position Byzantium as the equal of any European monarchy. His court glittered with pageantry, tournaments, and intellectual debates. Visitors marveled at the splendor of Constantinople, where the Hagia Sophia still shone with golden mosaics, and markets overflowed with silks, spices, and treasures from east and west. Military ambitions. Manuel was no mere showman, he was a warrior. He fought against the Hungarians in the Balkans, against the Normans in Italy, and against the Seljuks in Anatolia. His campaigns were bold, sometimes overreaching, but they restored Byzantium to the stage of great powers. Yet despite victories, he faced limits. The empire's resources, though revived, were not endless. His dreams of reconquering Italy or dominating the Crusader states often exceeded what Byzantium could sustain. The strength of the Komnenian system. The Komnenian dynasty succeeded not just through individual brilliance, but by reshaping the empire's foundations. Military reforms. They rebuilt the Byzantine army, blending professional soldiers with alliances from Western knights and mercenary forces. This created a flexible, formidable military machine that could hold its own against Turks, Normans, and Hungarians alike. Aristocratic networks. The Komnenoi also relied on extended family ties. By marrying into powerful clans, they secured loyalty and wove a network of aristocracy bound to the throne. This system of kinship politics stabilized the empire, though at the cost of concentrating power in elite hands. Economic recovery. Trade flourished once more. Though Venetian privileges strained Byzantine merchants, the empire's position as a crossroads of commerce brought wealth back to Constantinople. Markets thrived, ships filled the harbors, and taxes replenished the treasury. A cultural flourishing. The Komnenian era was not only about politics and war, it was also a cultural rebirth. Philosophers debated Aristotle and Plato anew. Theologians composed works of subtle beauty, defending orthodoxy with reason and eloquence. Art and architecture reflected renewed confidence, icons glowed with delicate brushwork, manuscripts sparkled with illumination, and churches rose in harmonious design. Even Western travelers, accustomed to the grandeur of their own cathedrals, were astonished by Constantinople's magnificence. The empire seemed once again to embody both ancient wisdom and Christian glory. The fragility of greatness. Yet beneath the brilliance, shadows lingered. The empire's strength was rebuilt, but it rested on delicate balances, alliances with Venice that bred resentment, reliance on aristocratic families that weakened central authority, and wars that stretched resources thin. When Manuel died in 1180, the Komnenian system began to unravel. His young son, Alexios II, factionalism, intrigue, and external pressures soon tore at the empire once more. The Komnenian revival had been a miracle of resilience, but it could not erase centuries of challenges. Still, for nearly a century, Byzantium had shone brightly again, a phoenix rising from ashes, radiant in its last great era of power. As you breathe deeply and let your body sink into calm, imagine the golden domes of Constantinople beneath the setting sun of the 12th century. The streets are alive with merchants and pilgrims. The court of Manuel Komnenos dazzles with knights, scholars, and courtiers from across the world. Byzantium, so often battered, had found its rhythm again. Though its time of greatness would not last forever, the Komnenian emperors proved that even an empire long thought dying could revive with brilliance, courage, and vision. It was Byzantium's last great age of strength before the storms of the Crusades and the tragedy of 1204. But in this moment, this golden autumn, the empire was alive, proud, and beautiful. And as your thoughts drift deeper, you may reflect on this truth, that even in decline, there can be revival, even in weakness, renewal, and even at twilight, a brilliance that lingers in memory. The road to 1204 and the sack of Constantinople. The story of Byzantium is one of brilliance and fragility, of dazzling heights and sudden plunges. And nowhere is this truth felt more deeply than in the road that led to 1204, the year Constantinople, the jewel of the Eastern world, was torn apart by its fellow Christians. The sack of Constantinople by the armies of the Fourth Crusade is remembered as one of the darkest chapters in medieval history. It was not simply the fall of a city. It was the shattering of an empire's heart, the plundering of centuries of culture, the humiliation of Byzantium at the hands of those who claimed to march under the banner of the cross. But such a catastrophe did not happen overnight. It was the outcome of decades of tension, decline, ambition, and betrayal. To understand the fall of Constantinople in 1204, we must walk the long, uneasy path that led Byzantium from its Komnenian revival to its tragic betrayal. So let us journey slowly, gently, step by step, into the shadows that gathered over the empire. After Manuel, a fragile throne. The death of Manuel I Komnenos in 1180 marked the end of Byzantium's last great age of strength. Manuel's reign had been glorious, but also expensive. His ambition stretched the empire's resources thin. He dreamed of conquering Italy, dominating the Crusader states, and leading Christendom, but many of these dreams remained unfulfilled. His son, Alexios II Komnenos, was only 11 when he inherited the throne. Too young to rule, he was placed under the regency of his mother, the Latin-born Maria of Antioch. This regency fueled resentment. Many in Constantinople distrusted the empress, seeing her as a foreigner favoring Western interests. Nobles quarreled, factions plotted, and ordinary people grew restless. Into this atmosphere stepped Andronikos Komnenos, cousin of Manuel, a man both charming and ruthless. Andronikos I, tyrant and tragedy. Andronikos seized power in 1183, overthrowing the regency. At first, the people welcomed him, for he promised to end corruption and defend Byzantine tradition against Western influence. But soon, his rule turned into tyranny. He purged rivals with cruelty, using terror to hold the throne. Even his reforms, aimed at curbing the power of aristocrats, earned him enemies. In 1185, as tensions boiled over, the Normans invaded from Sicily, sacking Thessalonica. The people, outraged by defeat and cruelty, rose against Andronikos. He was captured, dragged through the streets, and subjected to a brutal public execution. Thus ended his brief, violent reign, leaving the empire once again unstable, its prestige shattered. The Angeloi dynasty, decline accelerates. After Andronikos, the throne passed to the Angeloi dynasty, a family notorious for incompetence, extravagance, and corruption. Under Isaac II Angelos and his successors, the empire weakened rapidly. The treasury was squandered on luxury. Military discipline collapsed. Powerful governors and aristocrats acted with impunity, while enemies pressed from all sides. The Bulgarians rose in rebellion, carving out their own strong state. The Seljuks remained a threat in Anatolia. And the West grew increasingly hostile, resentful of Byzantine arrogance and suspicious of Orthodox Christianity. By the late 12th century, Byzantium was still magnificent in appearance, but hollow at its core. Its walls still stood strong, its markets still bustled with trade, but its political foundations were crumbling. The call of the Fourth Crusade. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, the Fourth Crusade was called. Unlike the earlier crusades, this one was intended to strike at Egypt, the key to Muslim power in the eastern Mediterranean. But crusades required ships, provisions, and money resources the knights did not have. They turned to the Republic of Venice, whose merchants had long profited from Byzantine trade. The Venetians agreed to provide a fleet, but at a staggering price. When the Crusaders could not pay in full, Venice demanded another kind of service. They would use the Crusaders to attack rival ports, beginning with the Christian city of Zara. Thus, the Fourth Crusade, meant to reclaim the Holy Land, was diverted into serving Venice's ambitions. The Byzantine prince in exile. Into this tangled web stepped a desperate figure, Alexios Angelos, the son of the deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II. After Isaac had been blinded and overthrown by his brother, Alexios fled into exile. He now promised the Crusaders vast rewards if they would help him regain his throne. He offered them gold, ships, and to the Crusaders, burdened by debt and seeking funds, his offer was irresistible. And so, the course of history turned. The Fourth Crusade set its sights not on Egypt, nor even on Muslim lands, but on Constantinople itself. The First Siege of Constantinople, 1203. In 1203, the Crusader fleet sailed across the sea, arriving before the mighty walls of Constantinople. For the people of Byzantium, the sight was shocking. Armies of Latin Christians, supposedly allies in faith, now stood as enemies at their gates. The city, weakened by misrule, offered little resistance. The Crusaders stormed parts of the walls, and Alexios Angelos was installed as Alexios IV, ruling alongside his restored father, Isaac II. At first, there was hope. But Alexios IV quickly realized he could not keep his promises. The treasury was empty. The people despised him for favoring the Latins. And soon, resentment turned into open revolt. The Second Siege and Betrayal, 1204. By early 1204, tension between Byzantines and Crusaders had reached breaking point. Riots broke out in the city. Fires raged through neighborhoods. A new emperor, Alexios V. Doukas, seized power, determined to resist the Latins. But by then, it was too late. In April 1204, the Crusaders launched their final assault. The mighty walls of Constantinople, which for centuries had repelled Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and countless enemies, now fell to fellow Christians. The sack of Constantinople. What followed was devastation almost beyond words. For 3 days, the city was subjected to plunder and violence. Churches were desecrated, their treasures stolen, their sacred relics scattered across Europe. The Hagia Sophia itself was looted, its golden altar torn apart, its holy vessels carried off, its sanctity violated. Nuns were assaulted, libraries destroyed, and countless works of art lost forever. The riches of centuries, gathered from across the empire, were carried away on Venetian ships. To the Byzantines, it was not only a physical disaster but a spiritual wound. The empire that had seen itself as the heart of Christendom had been betrayed by its supposed allies. The Latin Empire. In the aftermath, the victors divided the spoils. A Latin empire of Constantinople was established, ruled by a Western emperor. Venice claimed great swaths of territory, along with priceless relics and treasures. The Byzantine aristocracy fled, establishing successor states in Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus. Though these states preserved Byzantine culture and identity, the empire itself had been broken. The sack of 1204 marked not just the loss of a city, but the end of Byzantium's central role in the Christian world. It was a wound from which the empire would never fully recover. And so, as you breathe slowly and let your thoughts drift, imagine the golden domes of the streets once filled with merchants and pilgrims now echo with silence, broken stones, and smoldering ruins. The road to 1204 had been long, paved with ambition, betrayal, and decline. Byzantium, once the shining heart of the East, had been struck down not by distant enemies, but by those who claimed to share its faith. Yet even in this tragedy, the Byzantine spirit endured. In Nicaea, in Trebizond, in the hearts of its people, the dream of restoration lived on. But the empire had changed forever. The fall of 1204 was not the final end, but it was a breaking point, a moment when Byzantium, glorious for so many centuries, was humbled and diminished, its brilliance scattered like relics across Europe. And as you drift deeper into calm, you may reflect on this truth, that even the mightiest walls cannot protect forever, that betrayal can cut deeper than battle, and that every empire carries within it both greatness and fragility. The empire in exile. Nicaea, Trebizond, and the fight for survival. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 shattered Byzantium's heart. The golden capital that had endured for 9 centuries through wars, sieges, plagues, and political storms, was now a captive city under Latin rule. For many, it seemed that the empire itself had ended. The walls had fallen, the palaces burned, the holy relics stolen. Yet, the story of Byzantium was not finished. From the ruins rose a new chapter, a tale of exile, resilience, and survival. Though the empire had lost its capital, its spirit endured in new lands, carried by princes, generals, and common folk who refused to let their civilization vanish. 3 centers would emerge as guardians of Byzantine identity: Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus. Together, they kept alive the dream of Constantinople, each carving out its own destiny, each holding a fragment of the empire's soul. The Latin Empire of Constantinople. Before we turn to the exiled Byzantines, let us pause to glimpse the new rulers of Constantinople. After 1204, the victors established the Latin Empire, placing Baldwin of Flanders on the throne. Venice took the lion's share of spoils, seizing key ports, islands, and commercial privileges. Western lords divided Byzantine lands as if they were conquered estates, assigning duchies, counties, and baronies across Greece. But the Latin Empire was fragile. Its rulers were strangers in a foreign land, speaking different tongues, practicing Latin Christianity in a city devoted to orthodoxy. The Byzantines who remained saw them as usurpers, their presence a constant insult. And beyond Constantinople, 3 Byzantine successor states prepared to resist. The Empire of Nicaea. The strongest of these successor states arose in Nicaea, a city nestled in Asia Minor, just across the Sea of Marmara from Constantinople. Founded by members of the Lascaris family, the Empire of Nicaea became the main heir to Byzantine legitimacy. Its founder, Theodore I Lascaris, declared himself emperor, rallying loyal generals, scholars, and clergy. From the beginning, Nicaea carried the weight of the imperial tradition. It preserved the Byzantine court, upheld Orthodox Christianity, and became the new home of the Patriarch, ensuring spiritual continuity. Though smaller than the old empire, Nicaea was strategically placed. It held fertile lands, a strong military base, and proximity to Constantinople itself. This made it the most likely candidate to one day reclaim the capital. The Empire of Trebizond. Far to the east, along the Black Sea coast, another Byzantine offshoot took root, the Empire of Trebizond. Founded in 1204 by Alexios and David Komnenos, grandsons of the Emperor Andronikos I, Trebizond was distant from Constantinople yet rich in trade. The city of Trebizond had long thrived as a commercial hub, linking the Black Sea with the Silk Road and the markets of Persia and beyond. Unlike Nicaea, Trebizond carved out an identity of its own. It leaned toward Eastern influences, blending Byzantine traditions with local customs. Its emperors proudly traced their lineage to the Komnenian dynasty, presenting themselves as true heirs of Byzantium. For centuries, Trebizond would survive as a glittering outpost of Byzantine culture, clinging to its independence even when Constantinople was reclaimed by others. The Despotate of Epirus. The third center of resistance was the Despotate of Epirus, in western Greece. Founded by Michael I Komnenos Doukas, Epirus combined rugged mountains with access to the Adriatic Sea. Though smaller and less stable than Nicaea, it became a power in its own right. Epirus often viewed itself as the rightful heir to Constantinople, competing fiercely with Nicaea for legitimacy. Its rulers sometimes allied with Western powers, sometimes opposed them, shifting as circumstances demanded. Epirus would remain a rival to Nicaea, reflecting the fractured nature of Byzantine politics even in exile. A civilization in fragments. Imagine, for a moment, the Byzantine world after 1204. The once united empire was now a mosaic of fragments. Constantinople under Latin rule, its treasures carried away. Nicaea stands as the beacon of Orthodox resistance. Trebizond, proud and prosperous on the Black Sea. Epirus, ambitious and defiant in the west. The dream of unity lingered, but the reality was division. And yet, even in this fractured state, Byzantium endured. The scholars who fled Constantinople carried their manuscripts to Nicaea. Monks carried relics and icons to new monasteries. Families carried traditions, songs, and stories, keeping alive the sense of belonging to a greater whole. The struggle against the Latins. The exiled empires did not simply survive, they fought back. From the very beginning, Nicaea waged war against the Latin Empire, reclaiming towns, fortresses, and villages across Asia Minor. Its armies, hardened by experience, proved far more capable than the feudal levies of the Latins. The Latin Empire, though grand in name, struggled with constant shortages of men and money. It faced enemies on every side, Bulgarians in the north, Niceans in the east, and restless Greeks within its borders. For the people of Byzantium, resistance became both a duty and a source of hope. Every victory against the Latins was celebrated as a step toward redemption. The Orthodox Church in exile. Perhaps the most important survival of all was spiritual. After 1204, the Patriarch of Constantinople relocated to Nicaea, ensuring that Orthodox Christianity retained its leadership and identity. The Church became the soul of the exiled empire, binding people together when political authority was fragile. Monasteries in Asia Minor and on Mount Athos flourished, preserving manuscripts, icons, and theological traditions. Faith became not only a comfort, but a rallying cry, to endure, to resist, and to one day return to the Holy City. Life in the exiled states. What was life like for ordinary Byzantines during this time of exile? In Nicaea, people rebuilt a miniature version of Constantinople. Markets bustled with goods from across the Aegean. Scholars lectured in small academies, keeping alive the spirit of classical learning. Farmers tilled fertile fields, producing grain, olives, and wine to feed the population. In Trebizond, life revolved around the sea. Merchants traded with Genoa and Venice, exporting silk, timber, and silver. The city's steep hills were crowned with churches and fortifications, a reminder of both piety and vigilance. In Epirus, the people lived among mountains and valleys, farming sheep and goats, living in fortified villages. Here, life was harsher, but the spirit of independence burned strong. In all these places, life continued not unchanged, but unbroken. Families sang the same hymns, told the same stories, and dreamed the same dream, that one day, Constantinople would be theirs again. The hope of return. Through all the struggles, the exiled Byzantines never abandoned the vision of return. Every campaign against the Latins was measured by one question: would it bring them closer to Constantinople? Every treaty, every alliance, was weighed against the greater goal. Generations would pass before the city was reclaimed, but in these years of exile, the determination was forged. The empire in exile was not merely a shadow, it was the seed of restoration. And so, as you rest and breathe, imagine the Byzantine world of the early 13th century. Picture Nicaea's walls, holding firm against Latin invaders. Picture Trebizond, its ships sailing across the Black Sea, carrying silk and spices to distant markets. Picture Epirus, its mountain strongholds defiant against all threats. Though Constantinople lay in foreign hands, Byzantium still lived in faith, in memory, in exile. The empire had been wounded, but it had not died. Its people carried the torch through darkness, keeping alive the dream of restoration. And in time, that dream would return them to their capital. But for now, the story is one of patience, of endurance, and of survival against the odds. For Byzantium was never merely a place. It was a spirit, a civilization, a light that no conquest could extinguish. The long road back, Nicaea and the reconquest of Constantinople. The year was 1204, and the unimaginable had happened. Constantinople, the jewel of the East, the city of Constantine and Justinian, had fallen not to Persians, nor Arabs, nor Turks, but to fellow Christians from the West. The Crusaders who had come under the banner of the cross had instead looted churches, burned palaces, and stolen relics once thought untouchable. The golden mosaics were stripped, the chalices melted, the holy icons carried across the sea to Venice and beyond. Yet, though the city lay in ruins, Byzantium was not dead. Its heart beat elsewhere in exile, in memory, in faith. And among the fragments of the shattered empire, one piece began to rise as the beacon of hope, the Empire of Nicaea. This is the story of the long road back, the decades of struggle and patience that would lead, at last, to the reconquest of Constantinople. A city lost, a dream unbroken. When Theodore I Lascaris established his court in Nicaea, he did not see himself as a provincial ruler. No, he was emperor of the Romans, heir to Constantine and all who came after. Though Constantinople was lost, he carried the dream of return like a torch in the darkness. And that dream became the guiding star of Nicaea's rulers across generations. It was not enough merely to survive. The Latins might hold the city, the Venetians might dominate the seas, but the Byzantines knew in their bones that Constantinople was theirs. This sense of destiny shaped every decision, every war, every alliance. The early struggles. The first decades after 1204 were precarious. The Latin Empire, though weak, controlled Constantinople and its immediate surroundings. Venice held critical ports and islands, strangling trade. Meanwhile, Epirus and Trebizond competed for legitimacy, each claiming to be Byzantium reborn. Theodore I Lascaris fought tirelessly to secure his base in Asia Minor. He strengthened Nicaea's fortifications, reorganized its army, and cultivated support from the Orthodox Church. The Patriarch, residing in Nicaea, crowned him emperor, ensuring that his rule carried both political and spiritual authority. His reign was marked by battles with Latins and Turks alike, but also by diplomacy. Through treaties, he ensured survival, buying time for Nicaea to grow stronger. John III Vatatzes, the farmer emperor. If Theodore laid the foundations, it was his successor, John III Vatatzes, who gave Nicaea its soul. Crowned in 1222, Vatatzes was not a man of glittering palaces or endless banquets. He was a ruler who valued simplicity, discipline, and care for his people. Stories tell of how he encouraged agriculture, walking among farmers in the fields, speaking with them as equals. He rewarded hard work, punished corruption, and ensured that his empire was well-fed and self-sufficient. For the people, he became known as the farmer emperor, a ruler who understood that an empire's strength lay not only in armies but in bread and grain, in vineyards and olive groves. Under his leadership, Nicaea prospered. Its lands grew rich, its population loyal, its armies disciplined. And always, his eyes turned toward Constantinople. The decline of the Latin Empire. While Nicaea grew strong, the Latin Empire in Constantinople withered. The Latins had never been fully accepted by the Greek population. Their rule was seen as foreign, their faith as intrusive. They lacked the wealth to maintain the great city, and they faced enemies on every side, Bulgarians to the north, Nicaeans to the east, restless Greek nobles within their own borders. Venice, though powerful, was more concerned with commerce than with defending the fragile Latin throne. By the mid-13th century, the Latin Empire had become a hollow shell, dependent on Western aid that rarely arrived. For Nicaea, this weakness was an opportunity. The road of diplomacy and patience. Conquering Constantinople would not be easy. The city's walls, even after 1204, remained formidable. The sea lanes were guarded by Venice. A reckless assault could destroy Nicaea's fragile gains. So the emperors of Nicaea pursued a patient strategy. They secured alliances, sometimes with the Pope, sometimes with other Christian rulers. They pushed gradually into Europe, taking towns in Thrace and Macedonia, slowly tightening the circle around Constantinople. By the 1240s, under John Vatatzes, Nicaea controlled much of Western Asia Minor and large parts of Greece. The dream was drawing closer. The role of the Church. Throughout this period, the Orthodox Church was the glue that held Byzantium together. In Nicaea, the Patriarchate ensured continuity, blessing the emperors as legitimate rulers. The monasteries preserved learning and prayer, giving hope to the faithful. The dream of returning to Hagia Sophia. Theodore II Lascaris, scholar on the throne. When John Vatatzes died in 1254, he was succeeded by his son, Theodore II Lascaris. Theodore was a man of learning, more scholar than warrior. He admired philosophy and science, spending hours in study and writing. Though mocked by some for his bookish ways, he governed with intelligence and care. But fate was unkind. He died young in 1258, leaving his son, John IV, a boy too young to rule. This moment of vulnerability opened the way for one of the most powerful figures in Byzantine history, Michael Palaiologos. Michael VIII Palaiologos the Restorer. Michael Palaiologos was ambitious, shrewd, and relentless. In 1259, he became co-emperor, and by 1261 he had seized full control. Unlike the scholarly Theodore or the patient John, Michael was a man of action. He saw clearly that the time to strike was near. The Latin Empire was weak, its garrisons thin, its treasury empty. All that remained was the right moment. The reconquest of Constantinople. That moment came in 1261. Michael had sent his general, Alexios Strategopoulos, on a mission near Constantinople with a small force. It was not meant to be a full-scale assault, merely reconnaissance. But fate intervened. Strategopoulos discovered that the Latin garrison had left the city to launch a raid elsewhere. The mighty Constantinople, for so long thought impregnable, lay almost undefended. Seizing the chance, he and his men slipped into the city through a hidden passage. They fought their way to the gates, flung them open, and allowed the rest of the army to pour in. By dawn, the banners of the Palaeologi flew once more over Constantinople. The Latin rulers fled in panic, their empire collapsing overnight. After nearly 60 years in exile, Byzantium had returned. The triumphant entry. When Michael VIII Palaiologos entered Constantinople later that year, it was with a sense of destiny fulfilled. The people lined the streets, weeping and singing hymns. Priests carried icons, incense filled the air, and the great bells of Hagia Sophia rang once more for an Orthodox emperor. It was as if time itself had been healed, the wound of 1204 finally closed. The empire was reborn. The Palaiologan dynasty would rule from Constantinople for 2 more centuries. The cost of restoration. Yet, even in triumph, shadows lingered. The Constantinople that Michael VIII reclaimed was not the glorious city of old. Its palaces lay in ruins, its population diminished, its wealth plundered. Decades of neglect had scarred the city deeply. Restoring it would take generations, and the empire that rose again in 1261 was smaller, weaker, and more vulnerable than its predecessors. Still, the return was a miracle. Against all odds, Byzantium had survived its greatest catastrophe and reclaimed its capital. As you drift deeper into farmers who had prayed for decades, now seeing their emperor return to Constantinople. Priests who had sung hymns in exile, now chanting once more in Hagia Sophia. Children born in Nicaea, who had never seen the capital, are now walking its streets for the first time. The dream of return, nurtured for nearly 60 years, had at last come true. The road had been long. It had demanded patience, sacrifice, and faith. But Byzantium had proven once again that it was more than stone walls and golden domes. It was a civilization of resilience, a flame that could flicker but never be extinguished. And so, the empire entered its final act, restored yet fragile, reborn yet burdened by the weight of its past. The story of Byzantium was not over. But on that summer day in 1261, as the banners of the double-headed eagle flew once more above Constantinople, the dream was alive again. The Palaiologan Renaissance and the struggle to endure. The year was 1261, and a miracle had happened. Constantinople, lost to the Latins for nearly 6 decades, had been reclaimed. The double-headed eagle once again spread its wings over the Queen of Cities. Hagia Sophia, defiled and broken, rang with Orthodox hymns as priests wept tears of joy. Michael VIII Palaiologos, the restorer, had accomplished what seemed impossible. Byzantium was reborn. But what kind of empire had returned? Though the capital was back in Byzantine hands, the world had changed. The Latin West was stronger than ever, the rising powers of Venice and Genoa dominated the seas, and in the east the shadow of the Turks was lengthening. The empire that Michael VIII restored was no longer the mighty, sprawling dominion of Justinian or Basil II. It was smaller, weaker, and scarred. Yet, in this fragile final age, Byzantium experienced something remarkable, a cultural flowering, a renaissance of art, learning, and spirituality. It was the twilight of an empire, but it glowed with a beauty that would echo far beyond its borders. This is the story of the Palaiologan Renaissance and the empire's struggle to endure. A capital in ruins. When the Byzantines re-entered Constantinople in 1261, the sight that met them was heartbreaking. The city, once called the eye of the whole world, was a shell of its former self. Palaces had been gutted by fire. Churches looted of their treasures. Hagia Sophia itself, for nearly 6 decades used as a Latin cathedral, bore scars of neglect and desecration. The population had dwindled. Streets once bustling with traders, scholars, and pilgrims now lay quiet, grass pushing through the cracks of abandoned squares. Yet the people did not despair. For them, the very act of returning was victory enough. They would rebuild, stone by stone, hymn by hymn. Farmers who had prayed for decades, now seeing their emperor return to Constantinople. Priests who had sung hymns in exile, now chanting once more in Hagia Sophia. Children born in Nicaea, who had never seen the capital, are now walking its streets for the first time. The dream of return, nurtured for nearly 60 years, had at last come true. The road had been long. It had demanded patience, sacrifice, and faith. But Byzantium had proven once again that it was more than stone walls and golden domes. It was a civilization of resilience, a flame that could flicker but never be extinguished. And so, the empire entered its final act, restored yet fragile, reborn yet burdened by the weight of its past. The story of Byzantium was not over. But on that summer day in 1261, as the banners of the double-headed eagle flew once more above Constantinople, the dream was alive again. The Paleologan Renaissance and the struggle to endure. The year was 1261, and a miracle had happened. Constantinople, lost to the Latins for nearly 6 decades, had been reclaimed. The double-headed eagle once again spread its wings over the Queen of Cities. Hagia Sophia, defiled and broken, rang with Orthodox hymns as priests wept tears of joy. Michael VIII Palaiologos, the restorer, had accomplished what seemed impossible. Byzantium was reborn. But what kind of empire had returned? Though the capital was back in Byzantine hands, the world had changed. The Latin West was stronger than ever, the rising powers of Venice and Genoa dominated the seas, and in the east the shadow of the Turks was lengthening. The empire that Michael VIII restored was no longer the mighty, sprawling dominion of Justinian or Basil II. It was smaller, weaker, and scarred. Yet, in this fragile final age, Byzantium experienced something remarkable, a cultural flowering, a renaissance of art, learning, and spirituality. It was the twilight of an empire, but it glowed with a beauty that would echo far beyond its borders. This is the story of the Paleologan Renaissance and the empire's struggle to endure. A capital in ruins. When the Byzantines re-entered Constantinople in 1261, the sight that met them was heartbreaking. The city, once called the eye of the whole world, was a shell of its former self. Palaces had been gutted by fire. Churches looted of their treasures. Hagia Sophia itself, for nearly 6 decades used as a Latin cathedral, bore scars of neglect and desecration. The population had dwindled. Streets once bustling with traders, scholars, and pilgrims now lay quiet, grass pushing through the cracks of abandoned squares. Yet the people did not despair. For them, the very act of returning was victory enough. They would rebuild, stone by stone, hymn by hymn. The Hesychast controversy. One of the defining features of this period was a deepening of spiritual life. In the 14th century, a theological debate shook Byzantium, the Hesychast controversy. Monks on Mount Athos taught the practice of inner stillness hesychia as a way to experience the uncreated light of God. Through prayer and silence, they believed one could glimpse the divine presence itself. Some scholars criticized this as superstition. But defenders, like Gregory Palamas, argued passionately that it was the very heart of Orthodox spirituality. The debate was fierce, but in the end, hesychasm was affirmed, shaping Orthodox mysticism to this day. It was another reminder that, even as the empire declined politically, its spiritual life deepened. decline and division. But the flowering of culture could not hide the empire's weakness. By the 14th century, Byzantium was beset on all sides. The rising power of the Ottoman Turks threatened from Asia Minor. Civil wars within the Paleologan dynasty drained resources and weakened defenses. Plague struck, killing thousands, leaving the empire vulnerable. Still, the people endured. Churches were rebuilt, hymns were sung, mosaics laid with trembling hands. The empire clung to life, its faith and culture a fortress stronger than its crumbling walls. The Paleologan Renaissance in art. Perhaps the greatest expression of this age was in its art. In the mosaics of Cora Church, Christ gazes with eyes full of mercy and mystery, surrounded by images of the Virgin, the saints, and the prophets. In frescoes across Macedonia and Serbia, the human form was painted with new naturalism, figures soft and lifelike, infused with a spiritual glow. This was not an art of triumph and conquest. It was an art of survival, of inner beauty, of hope in the face of loss. A bridge to the future. Though Byzantium itself would one day fall, its final renaissance ensured that its spirit lived on. The manuscripts preserved by Byzantine scholars traveled west, feeding the minds of Petrarch, Boccaccio, and the humanists of Renaissance Italy. The theology of hesychasm shaped Eastern Christianity for centuries. The art of the Paleologan age inspired icon painters across the Orthodox world. In its twilight, Byzantium gave the world treasures that outlasted its empire. As you rest, imagine walking through the quiet streets of Constantinople during the Paleologan age. The city is smaller, quieter, but filled with an atmosphere of resilience. In one church, a monk chants the evening prayer. In another, an artist bends over a wooden panel, painting the sorrowful yet radiant face of the Virgin. The empire is weak, yet the spirit is strong. And though its rulers struggle, its people create beauty that will echo across centuries. The Paleologan Renaissance was a light in the darkness, proof that even as empires crumble, the human longing for truth, beauty, and God endures. The twilight of Byzantium, civil wars, plagues, and the rise of the Ottomans. The Paleologan Renaissance had brought beauty, learning, and a flickering light of hope to Byzantium. But behind the mosaics and manuscripts, behind the hymns and the icons, the empire's foundations were crumbling. The restored Constantinople of the late 13th and 14th centuries was no longer the proud citadel of old. It was a city of faded grandeur, caught between memory and reality. And now, the twilight has come. The empire, worn by centuries of struggle, entered its final age, an age of civil wars, devastating plagues, and the relentless rise of a new power to the east, the Ottomans. A fragile restoration. After the reconquest of 1261, the Paleologi struggled to hold together what remained of the empire. Michael VIII's diplomacy had secured Constantinople, but it left behind a bitter legacy. His concessions to the Latin West, especially attempts at church union, sowed distrust among his people. His successors inherited a fragile state. Its treasury was thin, its armies weakened, and its territories scattered like fragile islands in a turbulent sea. By the early 14th century, Byzantium was surrounded by rising powers: Serbia in the Balkans, Bulgaria resurgent, and most ominously, the advancing Turks in Asia Minor. Civil war erupts. As if external enemies were not enough, Byzantium turned upon itself. In 1321, a dynastic quarrel erupted into open conflict. The young Andronikos II Palaiologos faced rebellion from his ambitious grandson, Andronikos III. What began as a dispute within the palace spread across the empire, dividing nobles, cities, and provinces. Armies marched, sieges dragged on, and Byzantium's precious resources drained away. The civil war stretched on for years, weakening the empire at the very moment unity was most needed. When Andronikos III finally seized power in 1328, Byzantium was more vulnerable than ever. The Black Death. As if war were not enough, a darker shadow crept across Europe and Byzantium alike: the plague. In the mid-14th century, Constantinople was struck by the Black Death. Ships brought it into the harbors, rats carried it through the streets, and soon the queen of cities was consumed by terror. People died in their homes, in the markets, in the churches. The sound of funeral chants filled the air. Families locked themselves indoors. Monks prayed as carts of bodies rolled past. The population, already dwindling, shrank further. Fields went untended, trade slowed, and despair spread like smoke. The empire, once the vibrant center of the world, felt itself withering. The rise of the Ottomans. Even as Byzantium weakened, a new force was rising in the east. The Ottoman Turks, once a small frontier principality, grew swiftly in strength. Their leader, Osman I, gave his name to the dynasty that would one day dominate the region. His successors expanded relentlessly. They crossed into Byzantine lands in Asia Minor, seizing towns and fortresses. By the mid-14th century, they had crossed into Europe, capturing Gallipoli after an earthquake weakened its defenses. This was no longer a distant threat. The Turks were at the gates of the Balkans, their armies swift and disciplined, their vision of conquest clear. Byzantium, caught in civil wars and weakened by plague, could do little to resist. A city shrinking. Meanwhile, Constantinople itself became a city of ghosts. Travelers described wide streets nearly empty, once mighty forums reduced to silence, neighborhoods reclaimed by gardens and grazing animals. The city's walls still stood proud, a reminder of its former power, but within those walls the population had dwindled drastically. From nearly 1 million souls in its golden age, it was now reduced to perhaps 50,000. Yet within its churches, the light of devotion burned on. Priests intoned ancient hymns, candles flickered before icons, and the people clung to their faith as the world around them crumbled. The Serbs and the Bulgarians. As Byzantium struggled, its Balkan neighbors rose. The Serbian king Stefan Dusan forged an empire that stretched across much of the Balkans. In 1346, he crowned himself Emperor of the Serbs and Romans, a title that challenged Byzantium itself. Though his reign was brief, it revealed how far the Byzantine world had shifted. Where once Constantinople had dominated the Balkans, now it was rivaled and even overshadowed by younger, hungrier states. The Bulgarians, too, pushed for dominance, though their own strength waxed and waned. Byzantium, once master of the region, was now one struggling player among many. Civil war again. As if one civil war had not been enough, the empire fell again into fratricidal conflict. In 1341, after the death of Andronikos III, a regency for his young son John V Palaiologos was challenged by the powerful general John VI Kantakouzenos. Once again, nobles and cities chose sides. Once again, brothers fought against brothers. The civil war dragged on for years, further exhausting the empire. To win allies, each side made dangerous concessions, even calling upon foreign powers for aid. The Ottomans, watching closely, seized their chance. Invited as allies in the civil conflict, they crossed the straits into Europe and they never left. The Ottoman advance. From their new foothold in Gallipoli, the Ottomans spread rapidly through the Balkans. They fought with discipline and ferocity, their cavalry swift, their infantry resolute. Christian states fell one by Byzantium, too weak to resist, found itself increasingly isolated. The empire was now little more than Constantinople itself, along with a few scattered territories in Greece. The Turks, unlike past invaders, came not to plunder and retreat, but to stay. Daily life in a fading empire. Even in decline, life continued in Byzantium. In Constantinople's shrinking markets, traders still sold spices, cloth, and books. Monks continued their chants on Mount Athos. Farmers still sowed their fields in the Peloponnese. But life was shadowed by uncertainty. At any moment, war might sweep across the land. At any moment, plague might return. Families spoke of past glory, of Justinian's Hagia Sophia, of Basil II's victories, of the empire that had once stretched across continents. Now, those memories seemed like dreams fading in the morning light. A spiritual deepening. Perhaps because the empire's political power was slipping away, its people turned ever more deeply to their faith. Churches became sanctuaries of memory, where the glory of Byzantium lived on in chants and icons, even as the empire itself shrank. The theology of hesychasm, affirmed in the previous century, spread hope of inner light, of encountering God even in a world of darkness. If the empire's body was failing, its soul seemed more alive than ever. The shadow of the end. By the late 14th century, the truth was clear: Byzantium's days were numbered. The Ottomans pressed ever closer, their power growing with each victory. The empire, reduced to a sliver, had little strength left. Civil wars had drained it. Plagues had weakened it. Poverty had hollowed it out. And yet, through all this, Constantinople endured. Its walls stood firm, its people clung to hope, and its churches echoed with hymns of faith. It was a twilight world, dark, uncertain, but not yet extinguished. As you rest, picture the empire in its final centuries. A city, once the heart of the world, now quiet, its streets empty but its churches full of prayer. An empire, once mighty, now fragile, yet still clinging to life. And beyond its walls, the rising power of the Ottomans, young, strong, and unstoppable. The twilight of Byzantium was filled with sorrow and loss. Yet within it shone resilience, faith, and a beauty that no conqueror could erase. The empire was fading. The end was near. But the spirit of Byzantium, the spirit of faith, of beauty, of endurance remained, ready to echo through the ages. The last centuries, desperation, union debates, this was an age of paradox, an empire so small it seemed a city-state, and yet so symbolic that its fate drew the gaze of Christendom. It was a time of theological debates and desperate diplomacy, of fleeting revivals and crushing defeats. And it was a time of waiting for the end that all knew must one day come. A diminished empire. By the late 14th century, Byzantium had become a pale reflection of itself. The once vast dominion was now scattered. Constantinople, the jewel of the Bosporus, still majestic behind its Theodosian walls. Morea, the Peloponnesian peninsula, where a Byzantine despotate clung to survival. A few isolated ports and fortresses, the last sparks of imperial authority. The emperors were still crowned in Hagia Sophia. The ceremonies still echoed with ancient grandeur. But the empire they ruled had shrunk to a shadow of a shadow. And always, across the straits, the Ottomans grew stronger. The siege of 1394 to 1402. The threat became immediate in 1394, when Sultan Bayezid I surrounded Constantinople with a blockade. For nearly 8 years, the city endured a slow strangulation. Supplies dwindled. Hunger gnawed at the people. And the emperor, Manuel II Palaeologos, sought help wherever he could. Manuel traveled through Europe, appealing to kings and princes. He visited Venice, Paris, and even London, a Byzantine emperor wandering foreign courts like a supplicant. Yet though he was received with honor, he brought back little real aid. The city seemed doomed until fate intervened. In 1402, the Ottomans were crushed at the Battle of Ankara by the great conqueror Timur, the Tamerlane. Bayezid was captured, and the Ottoman state plunged into civil war. For Byzantium, it was a sudden reprieve, a brief breath of air in the suffocating twilight. Flickering revivals. The Ottoman Civil War, known as the Interregnum, gave Byzantium a fragile second life. Manuel II secured temporary peace and even regained a few territories. Constantinople reopened its gates to trade. In the Morea, fortresses were strengthened, and new walls were built across the Isthmus of Corinth to protect the peninsula. For a moment, it seemed possible that the empire might endure a while longer. But these were not the revivals of old, when emperors reconquered provinces or restored glory. They were flickers, fragile and temporary, staving off the inevitable. The endless plea for union. Throughout this final century, Byzantine emperors turned ever more desperately to the west. They knew that only with Latin aid could the empire hope to withstand the Ottomans. But the price was steep. The West demanded union of the churches and the submission of Orthodox Byzantium to papal authority, but the people resisted. In the streets and in the churches, voices rose, better the turban of the Turk than the tiara of the Pope. It was a bitter dilemma. The empire's survival seemed to require a sacrifice of its very soul. The Council of Florence. The climax of these debates came in the 1430s, with the Council of Florence. Emperor John VIII Palaeologos personally traveled to Italy, accompanied by Patriarch Joseph II and a host of bishops. They debated with Latin theologians for months, haggling over doctrine, ritual, and the wording of union. At last, worn down by pressure and desperation, the Byzantine delegation signed a decree of union in 1439. When the emperor returned to Constantinople, however, the reception was grim. The people rejected the union. The clergy denounced it. The faithful saw it as betrayal. Union existed on parchment, but not in the hearts of the Byzantines. The fall of Thessalonica. Even as union debates dragged on, the empire's lands slipped away. The great city of Thessalonica, second only to Constantinople, had been handed to Venice in a desperate bid for protection. But even Venetian ships and soldiers could not hold it. In 1430, the Ottomans captured Thessalonica. Its fall was a death blow to Byzantine prestige. The empire was now little more than Constantinople and the Morea, two candles flickering against the gathering dark. The shadow of the Ottomans. By the mid-15th century, the Ottoman state had recovered from its earlier chaos and emerged more powerful than ever. Under Sultan Murad II and then Mehmed II, the Turks pressed their advantage. They took territory steadily, cutting Byzantium off from allies, isolating Constantinople, and surrounding it with fortresses. The sultans were patient. They knew the empire was weak. They could wait, tightening the noose year by year. For the Byzantines, every day became a prayer for deliverance that never came. Life in the last Constantinople. Inside the city, life continued, though it was the life of a besieged people. The population, once hundreds of thousands, now numbered perhaps 40,000. Many neighborhoods lay abandoned, overgrown with weeds. Great forums stood silent, their statues toppled. And yet, Hagia Sophia still crowned the skyline, its dome lifting the eyes of the faithful toward heaven. In monasteries and homes, manuscripts were still copied, icons still painted, hymns still sung. Labor. Vineyards and olive groves flourished, and scholars continued to teach in its towns. But the Ottomans pressed even here, breaking through the hexamillion repeatedly. The despotate was a bastion, but a fragile one. The weight of desperation. By the 1440s, Byzantium's plight was desperate. John VIII had died without heirs, and his brother Constantine XI Palaeologos became the last emperor. Constantine was brave, devout, and realistic. He knew the empire could not survive alone. He renewed pleas to the West, even attempting to enforce the hated union in Hagia Sophia itself. But the West, weary from its own wars, sent little more than words. A few Italian ships, a handful of soldiers, but not the crusade the emperor had hoped for. Constantinople stood almost alone, facing the storm. The gathering storm. In 1451, the young Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne. Brilliant, ambitious, and utterly determined, Mehmed fixed his gaze upon Constantinople. He saw what many already knew. The city was the key to the empire. Whoever held Constantinople would command the gateway between Europe and Asia, and the heart of the old Roman world. The shadow deepened. Byzantium, now nearly 15 centuries old, felt the weight of destiny pressing down. Closing reflections. Imagine, as you drift deeper into rest, the empire in these last centuries. The weary emperors, standing beneath mosaics of Christ and the Virgin, swearing oaths of union they knew their people despised. The faithful, lighting candles in Hagia Sophia, whispering prayers for deliverance that never came. The narrow streets of Constantinople, filled with silence where once they had echoed with the noise of the empire. And always, beyond the walls, the growing strength of the Ottomans, patient, relentless, waiting. The end is close now. The empire's final act was about to unfold. The shadow of 1453 stretched across every street, every church, every heart. Byzantium stood on the edge of eternity, fragile but unbroken, ready to face its last dawn. The fall of Constantinople, 1453. The year was 1453. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had endured besieged by Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Rus, Latins, and countless enemies, yet always rising, always surviving. Now, at last, its fate hangs by a thread. The city of Constantine stood at the edge of eternity. A city surrounded. In the spring of 1453, the armies of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II gathered horsemen from the steppes, artillerymen from the frontier. At their head came the new terror of war, giant cannons, forged by master gun founders. The greatest of them, built by an engineer named Orban, was so massive it took 60 oxen and hundreds of men to haul. Its stone balls, each weighing more than half a ton, could smash walls thought invincible. By April, more than 80,000 Ottoman soldiers gathered before the land walls of Constantinople. The defenders. Against this tide stood a mere 7,000 defenders, perhaps fewer. Of these, only about 2,000 were foreigners, Italians from Genoa and Venice, mercenaries, and volunteers who refused to abandon Christendom's last bastion in the east. The rest were Byzantines, citizens of the city, soldiers of the emperor, monks, and common men who had taken up arms to defend their homes. At their head stood Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last of his line. Tall, dignified, and resolute, he knew the odds were hopeless. Yet he vowed to fight and die with his people rather than abandon the city his ancestors had ruled for centuries. The walls of Theodosius. The defenders' hope lay in the mighty Theodosian walls, built 1,000 years earlier. Layer upon layer of stone and brick stretched across the land approaches deep moats, outer walls, and inner ramparts. For centuries, these walls had defied every assault. Arabs had failed. Bulgars had failed. Crusaders had breached them only through betrayal. But now, facing the thunder of cannon, the walls trembled as never before. The opening salvos. On April 6, Mehmed's artillery roared to life. Day and night, the giant cannon belched fire and smoke, hurling stone balls against the walls. Entire towers shuddered. Stones cracked. Dust and rubble filled the air. The defenders rushed to repair the breaches, men, women, even children carrying baskets of earth and stone, patching walls as fast as they fell. By night, the city glowed with torches as work crews labored without rest. By day, the bells of Hagia Sophia rang, calling people to prayer and endurance. The siege had begun. The naval blockade. Meanwhile, Mehmed's fleet sealed the city from the sea. Dozens of galleys patrolled the Bosporus, while others pressed against the Golden Horn, where the Byzantines had stretched their great defensive chain. At first, the defenders had an advantage here. Venetian and Genoese ships, swift and experienced, bested the Ottomans in several skirmishes. Morale rose when, on April 20, 3 Genoese ships and a Byzantine transport forced their way into the harbor, breaking through the Ottoman blockade under a hail of arrows and cannon fire. The people of Constantinople cheered from the floated inside the Golden Horn itself, threatening the weakest parts of the city. The defenders' hearts sank. The sea was no longer theirs. Daily life under siege. Inside the walls, life took on the rhythm of desperation. Bread was rationed. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Families huddled in ruined houses, praying the walls would hold another day. Every night, processions wound through the streets. Priests carried relics, chanting hymns, blessing the walls and the people. Some swore they saw visions of the Virgin Mary above the ramparts, a sign of hope that God had not abandoned them. But fear gnawed constantly. The thunder of cannon never ceased. The ground shook with each impact. And outside, campfires of the Ottoman army lit the horizon like a second city of flame. The Emperor's Vigil. Emperor Constantine XI walked among his people constantly. He spoke to the soldiers on the walls, encouraging them, thanking them. He prayed in Hagia Sophia, kneeling beneath its great dome. He sat in council with his captains Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who led the defense, Lucas Notaras, the city's megas-do, and other loyal men. He knew the end was near, but he never faltered. When urged to flee, to seek safety in the west, Constantine refused. God forbid that I should live as an emperor without an empire. If this city is to fall, I will die with it. The final assault. By late May, the walls were crumbling. Breaches yawned where the cannons had struck again and again. Mehmed prepared for the final storm. He summoned his men, promising riches, glory, and paradise to those who fought. The city would be theirs. On the night of May 28, 1453, Constantinople held its last vigil. In Hagia Sophia, clergy and laity gathered for one final liturgy. Latins and Greeks, divided for centuries, now stood together, sharing communion, praying as one. Candles flickered. Hymns echoed in the vast dome. Tears flowed freely. Afterward, Constantine rode through the streets one last time, saying farewell to his people. He asked forgiveness from friend and foe alike, leaving no word unsaid. Then he returned to the walls. May 29, 1453. Before dawn, the Ottoman assault began. Wave after wave surged against the breaches. First came irregulars, poorly armed but countless, sent to tire the defenders. Then came more disciplined troops, scaling ladders, battering gates, pressing into the gaps. The defenders fought with desperation. Arrows flew, stones fell, the last stand of Constantine. Amid the chaos, Emperor Constantine cast aside the purple. He stripped the imperial insignia from his armor, lest he be recognized, and threw himself into the fray. With sword in hand, he fought side by side with his men. Witnesses said he cried out, "The city is lost, but I live." Then he vanished into the press of battle. His body was never found. The last Roman emperor died as a soldier, in the dust and blood of his city's final hour. The city falls. By morning, the Ottomans poured through the breaches. The walls were lost. Gates burst open. Soldiers flooded into Constantinople. The streets filled with screams and fire. Churches were looted, houses plundered, treasures seized. At last, Mehmed himself entered the city. Riding to Hagia Sophia, he ordered it cleansed and consecrated as a mosque. The great dome, which had echoed with Christian hymns for nearly 1,000 years, now resounded with the call to prayer. The end of Byzantium. So ended the Byzantine Empire, born of Rome, tempered by centuries of faith, struggle, and endurance. For 1,123 years, Constantinople had stood as the new Rome. Now it was the capital of the Ottomans, who would rule from it for centuries to come. The fall of the city sent shockwaves through the world. In the West, grief mingled with fear, as scholars fled bringing precious manuscripts, fueling the Renaissance. In the East, the Ottomans ascended as a new empire, heirs of Constantinople's might. But for Byzantium, the story had ended. And so, as you drift into the deepest rest, imagine the silence after the storm. The broken walls, the empty streets, the great dome of Hagia Sophia now echoing with unfamiliar prayers. The Bosporus, carrying away the smoke of battle. And the memory of an empire that had endured for over 1,000 years, finally giving way not in surrender, but in sacrifice. Constantine fell with his people. The city fell with its emperor. And Byzantium passed into history, not forgotten, but eternal in memory. Sleep now, carrying with you the weight of that long twilight, the courage of its last defenders, and the solemn beauty of a world's final dawn. Legacy of Byzantium. The walls had fallen. The city of Constantine lay silent under new banners. Yet even as the smoke of 1453 drifted across the Bosporus, Byzantium did not vanish. An empire may fall, but its memory, its culture, its faith, and its light endure woven into the lives of those who came after. This is the legacy of Byzantium. Echoes in the West. When Constantinople fell, many of its scholars, scribes, and thinkers fled westward, carrying with them manuscripts of ancient Greek and Roman texts. Arriving in Italy, they found eager students. The Renaissance, already blossoming, drank deeply from this influx of wisdom. Florence, Venice, and Rome became new homes for Byzantine learning. The painted icons of Byzantine churches inspired Italian masters. The dome of Hagia Sophia influenced the architects of St. Peter's Basilica. The chants of Byzantium found echoes in Western liturgies. Thus, though the empire was gone, its knowledge seeded the rebirth of Europe. Russia and the Third Rome. Far to the north, another legacy took root. The princes of Moscow had long looked to Constantinople as the heart of their faith. When the last Byzantine emperors married into Russian dynasties, a symbolic bond was formed. After 1453, the Russian Tsars claimed inheritance of the Byzantine mantle. If Rome had fallen once in the west, and a second time in the east with Constantinople, then Moscow declared itself the Third Rome. Orthodox Christianity continued to flourish there, carrying with it Byzantine liturgy, theology, and the vision of a Christian empire. Even the Russian double-headed eagle still seen today was borrowed directly from Byzantium's imperial seal. In the Ottoman world. Paradoxically, Byzantium also lived on through its conquerors. The Ottomans adopted Constantinople as their capital, renaming it Istanbul yet preserving much of its grandeur. The city became the jewel of their empire. Mehmed II himself styled his rule as the continuation of Roman emperorship. He preserved the bureaucracy of Byzantium, the court rituals, even the title of Caesar. Ottoman architects studied the domes and arches of Hagia Sophia, blending them into a new style that would give birth to the magnificent mosques of Istanbul. Thus, in conquest, Byzantium's artistry lived anew. The survival of orthodoxy. Though Hagia Sophia became a mosque, the faith of Byzantium endured in its people. In monasteries across Greece, on the holy mountain of Athos, and in the villages of the Balkans, priests and monks continued the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the chants, the icons, the prayers that had sustained Byzantium for 1,000 years. Through centuries of foreign rule, the Orthodox Church kept alive the memory of Constantinople. Its hymns, its calendar, its festivals carried on unchanged. To this day, the Patriarch of Constantinople, though no longer ruling an empire, still bears the title once tied to emperors and councils, a living link to Byzantium's spiritual heart. Art and beauty that endured. Walk through any museum of the world and you will find the fingerprints of Byzantium. Golden mosaics, shimmering with saints and angels, continue to captivate. The glowing faces and icons, austere yet tender, still invite prayer. The architecture of domes, whether in Moscow's onion-crowned cathedrals or the Renaissance basilicas of the West, trace their lineage to Hagia Sophia. Closing meditation, the eternal echo. The journey has been long. Empires have risen, flourished, and fallen. Cities have gleamed and grown silent. Yet here, in this final chapter, there is no more battle, no more clamor, no more weight of history. Only silence. Only reflection. Only the soft breath of eternity, echoing through the quiet. The river of time. Imagine time itself as a vast, gentle river. Its waters flow endlessly, carrying with them moments, memories, lives, and dreams. Upon its surface float the reflections of empires, shimmering like lanterns drifting into the night. Some glow brightly for a time and then fade, their light merging with the water. Others flicker softly, enduring across centuries, their glow steady but tender. You, too, are standing upon the bank of this river. The water moves steadily past, whispering to you. It tells you that nothing is lost. Every ripple carries the memory of what has been. Every current holds the imprint of what endures. The river does not hurry. It does not resist. It simply flows, carrying everything toward the sea of eternity. A city of dreams. Now, in your imagination, see a city not bound to one time, not fixed upon a single map. It is a city built of memory and light. The stones are not cold, they are warm, glowing with the stories once lived upon them. The streets are hushed, yet full of presence. The air carries no smoke, no clamor, only a tranquil stillness. In this city, domes shimmer softly under starlight. Mosaics sparkle with quiet radiance, not for display, but as if they were placed there simply to soothe the heart. Bells do not ring loudly, instead, they hum gently, like the low resonance of a song remembered in a dream. This city does not crumble. It does not fall. It endures because it is not made of stone, it is made of memory, of love, of the eternal echo that lingers when all else is gone. You are walking slowly through its streets. There is no rush. Each step is light, each corner filled with peace. You feel safe here, as though the walls are embracing you, as though every breath is welcome. The eternal echo. What is the eternal echo? It is the sound of prayers whispered long ago, still lingering in the silence. It is the rhythm of footsteps on marble, carried forward in your imagination. It is the golden shimmer of mosaics that, though dimmed by time, still glow within memory. The eternal echo is not history, not dates, not battles. It is the gentle breathing with the universe. Now take a slow breath. Feel how your chest rises gently, and then falls again. Another breath, calm and steady. And another. Your breath is not separate. It is the same rhythm as the tides upon the shore, the same rhythm as the wind moving through tall grass, the same rhythm as the stars burning quietly in the night sky. You are breathing with the universe. You are resting in harmony with everything that has been and everything that will be. With every inhale, you take in the stillness of eternity. With every exhale, you release the weight of time. A garden beyond time. In your mind, step now into a garden beyond time. The air is fragrant with blossoms that never fade. The sky is not bound to day or night, but glows in a gentle twilight. There is a fountain at the center, its water trickling with a sound as soft as a lullaby. Around you, trees spread their branches, their leaves shimmering with golden light. Birds rest quietly upon them, not singing loudly, but humming softly, as though the world itself is dreaming. This garden is peaceful. It is a sanctuary. It is the place where all stories come to rest, where all journeys arrive at their still conclusion. You walk slowly along its paths, your steps light upon the grass. The fountain whispers. The leaves sigh gently in the breeze. And you know you are safe. You are at home. The final embrace. As you sit beside the fountain, you feel the presence of countless lives that came before. They do not press upon you with weight, but surround you gently, like a soft embrace. You sense the love of generations past, the hopes of those who dreamed, the quiet courage of those who endured. Their presence is calm, eternal, unshaken. They are not gone. They are here, in the eternal echo. And you, too, will join them not in loss, but in continuity. Your story, your breath, your kindness, your dreams, all of it will ripple into the river of time, becoming part of the everlasting echo. Drifting into silence. The river flows gently. The city of dreams glows softly. The garden beyond time hums with quiet peace. You feel yourself drifting now, your thoughts growing lighter, your body sinking deeper into rest. Each breath carries you further into stillness. Each heartbeat slows, matching the rhythm of the eternal echo. There is no more struggle, no more noise, no more burden. Only calm. Only peace. Only the eternal echo, carrying you gently into sleep. Closing whisper. Rest now. The story is told. The empire has fallen, yet it endures. The world has turned, yet it is at peace. You are safe. You are loved. You are part of the eternal echo.